My name is Jason Benet. Today we have a very special guest.
I wanted to be different. I wanted to be something more than just a gross out horror film.
It was required by your contract that you had to deliver nudity and violence.
Wow, that really looks gross. Like, it's real.
We were actually in the cave, so there weren't any crocodiles there. The water was freezing. We didn't actually swim in them.
You know, I was scared, but I really liked the rush of it.
I'm a huge Dario Argento fan. I would happily have a giallo night.
The Thing and The Stuff. It sounds like I'm just saying gibberish, but those are names of movies.
The horror genre always evolves into something you're not expecting.
Why are we going here if everyone's died in this house?
I was actually scared as we were running through it.
Most of these guys who play really horrible characters are such sweet guys.
Part of this ongoing cult.
Anytime there's something spooky to be seen or heard or read, I'm there.
Horror has always felt like home to me.
Benet's Bloody Bits.
Okay, welcome to Triple B. My name is Jason Benet. Today I have a very cool guest. His name is David Gregory. He's one of the founders of Severin Films. They specialize in horror, exploitation, sexploitation, old and new. David, thank you for coming in and talking to me. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
I want to know, when did you start collecting physical media as a fan?
I started collecting tapes when I was about 12, I think, when things started to be banned in England. So me and Carl, who's the co-founder of Severin Films, we grew up together, and we would go around to video shops and find out if they had anything that they'd have to take down from the shelves. I guess the first tapes that I got were not banned tapes at that age, but I think it was like 13 or 14 when I was getting the banned tapes, which you can see behind me here. That collection is here with me in the Severin office.
So for people that don't know, can you explain in the UK what was the video nasty era and what was really going on over there? I think you would know better than anybody.
Well, it was when video first came in the when it first became popular in the early 80s. The UK was the first country to really embrace this new media and get video VCRs at home. And a lot of it had to do with the royal wedding, Charles and Diana, where everybody got a VCR so they could tape that off the telly. And so that was one of several reasons, but I think that was kind of the main event that people wanted to record. And so video shops started popping up everywhere, just as they did here. But a lot of stuff just came out from kind of, should we say, independents who were bringing out movies that probably hadn't played theatrically and hadn't had a rating, therefore, in the UK system. So there was no rating system on video. And so there was this huge panic that was spearheaded by Mary Whitehouse, who was a moral crusader. And she was very good at getting the ear of politicians, because politicians love column inches in the media. So they started reacting to the fact that these horror movies were entering the home, and were kind of building them up to be like dangerous films, basically, and that they were being watched by kids. And they started making up surveys and statistics about how many kids were actually watching these movies, and they've completely been debunked since then. But at the time, it seemed like a pretty serious issue, and everybody jumped on, all the newspapers, right wing and left wing, jumped on the bandwagon. Politicians jumped on this because they could, take the focus away from the Falklands War or from the record unemployment in the UK, and blame all the problems of society on these videos, which were now entering the home, which had never been the case before. And so very quickly they formulated this list called the Video Nasties list, which became obscene illegal films. Now, a lot of these films were never actually watched by anyone in the police department or the Obscene Publications Act, so things like The Evil Dead and The Funhouse were on there, a Tenebrae, stuff that's not really considered obscene even then, but they were all the same to these people, because they didn't know the difference between The Evil Dead and SS experiment camp. You know, they, as far as they were concerned, they were not like the Christopher Lee Hammer films that you would watch on the BBC. So they were all just ghettoized into these horrible, you know, snuff films. Essentially, was kind of what they were suggesting they were. So they all got banned, and then the Video Recordings Act came in, which basically meant that everything had to be rated. So all of the tapes, from children's films up to sex films, although there was no hardcore was completely illegal in the UK, and to some extent it still is. So basically it was all softcore films, the kind of films that you would get on Skinemax over here. That was as bad as hardcore as it got in the UK video industry of the era. All of that stuff was banned and had to be taken off the shelves. So basically they became very collectible tapes, but it also basically led to the creation of a kind of underground of film fans, particularly horror genre film fans, who would talk to each other through the fanzines. We'd find each other through fanzines in the UK, and we'd all write to each other or call each other on the phone or meet at film fairs and things like that. And we'd start this kind of healthy bootlegging system in order to be able to see the films that we wanted to see, that people in other countries were able to see.
I like that you mentioned the political aspect of things, because over in the United States in the late 80s, we had Jack Valente and the Motion Picture Association of America, as well as Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, were kind of doing the same thing, where they were kind of cripple horror films. And if you look at the late 80s in the United States, a lot of those films were neutered. They were watered down because of that aspect. But it seems like you guys got it much worse.
We did, and it's different. I mean, there's certainly, you know, that's, you know, Tipper Gore's thing was mainly about music, wasn't it? And she, and we never had that problem in England. And in fact, because of the way the media was demonizing films, you know, my mother, for example, was begging me to listen to Iron Maiden and devil worshipping music and not watch horror movies, you know, because of the way the media was presenting it. But we never had the issue with records over there, but movies we certainly did. And you're right, here they had the same with the MPAA, and basically they started to make horror films much more anemic in the early 80s. You know, when you look at the early 80s slasher films that were coming out, they were a lot bloodier, and then they just started to be less and less bloody. But at least in the US you could go out unrated. You couldn't do that in the UK, and you still can't.
When did you start to get into journalism? I could have sworn I heard that you interviewed Peter Jackson at a very young age. That's kind of something I'm envious of. I'd like to hear that story.
I did. I was so Peter Jackson was the first interview that I ever conducted, and it was during that time. I think Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles had already come out, so it was late 80s, or no, it may have been early 90s actually, because he was showing Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive, at the Cannes Film Festival in the Market. And so I was occasionally writing reviews for one of the fanzines I mentioned, In the Flesh magazine it was called, which was one of these ones where they would talk about video nasties and censorship and how we're being hard done by as horror fans in the UK. So I was in Cannes with my boss at the time. I worked for a small video distributor, and we just and he always wanted to go to Cannes, so he was like, let's just go. And so on the first day we were there, I recognized Peter Jackson just walking up and down the Croisette, because of course he was in Bad Taste, so I knew what he looked like, and he had a Bad Taste t-shirt on, which was the Dead giveaway. So I basically said, "Are you Peter Jackson?" And he's like, yeah, I've got my new film here. And basically I said, "Would I be able to interview you?" And he just gave me his card, and I did the interview with him there, and it ended up being published as a cover story on In the Flesh fanzine. But I also got to see Brain Dead, some of the earliest screenings of Brain Dead in the Market, and it was that was just mind-blowing. And they weren't full, and Peter Jackson was kind of standing on the street outside trying to give tickets away for people to come in, you know, so that it would be full. But I absolutely loved it, and you know, it's obviously quite a coup now that I got to interview Peter Jackson, because he's not quite as easy to get to, nor does he make as interesting films, if you ask me.
That's true. So you got to see the uncut. For people that don't know, Brain Dead is the uncut version. If you're watching the US Dead Alive, it's not quite the same film.
Yes, exactly. And but I don't know that the US cut was cut for violence, was it? I think it was just cut down for length. But I could be wrong about that. But anyway, they basically, but you know, that's one that even got through uncut in the UK because it's splatstick basically.
Yeah.
So even though it was the goriest film ever made at the time, it was all tongue in cheek. So that wasn't considered offensive in England.
Do you know what's keeping Bad Taste, Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles from coming out on Blu-ray in the US? Or even, it just seems like I used to own the Anchor Bay DVD of Bad Taste, and it's just been a long time coming.
Yeah, I worked on that Anchor Bay DVD. I got the making of for them because I had a tape of that making of Good Taste Made Bad Taste, I think it's called. But yeah, it's Peter Jackson. He basically he's restoring the films himself, which is worrying if you've seen Get Back. But he also, I imagine, is holding out for an enormous amount of money for these 3 films. Actually, it's 4 films because it's Heavenly Creatures as well. So he's I think he's just biding his time. There may be something to do with him not wanting Meet the Feebles out there, but that's completely rumor,
No,
but yeah,
you're right.
it's all up to him. So I think he's just taking his sweet time.
And then by the time we do get it, all the grain will be removed and people will start to look like wax figures. Unfortunately, maybe a little bit of that James Cameron effect as well.
I imagine that is going to be the case. Yes.
So when did you start working with Bill Lustig, Anchor Bay, in those days? Because late 90s and early 2000s, DVD was huge. And I worked at video stores and I collected, and I still have my Anchor Bay DVDs of The Black Cat, House by the Cemetery, Inferno, Deep Red. I still hold on to them, even though they've been updated with better versions. I'd like to know about those days working with William.
Yeah, I mean, those days were great in terms of like just real kind of trailblazing stuff that Jay Douglas and Bill Lustig mainly were doing at Anchor Bay. And I had started a VHS label in England, an ill-fated label called Exploited. The company was called Blue Underground. My company was called Blue Underground, but the label was called Exploited. And we licensed Vigilante and Maniac off Bill. Maniac got banned, so it never came out. They wouldn't even accept a cut version. It was just banned outright. There was no way you could cut it down in order for it to be acceptable for public consumption in England. But that's kind of how Bill and I first connected. And at that time, I also made my first documentary, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Shocking Truth, because that was finally unbanned in the UK towards the end of the 90s. And so in order to kind of celebrate that, I wanted Gunnar Hansen was brought over to a festival, and I met him and talked about how I wanted to make a documentary, and he helped me get in touch with all the people who were involved in the making of TCM. So I went over, with a camcorder to the US to interview everybody I could about making that classic film. And I interviewed Bill for that, just as somebody who saw it when it first came out and kind of what the reaction was. And he was going great guns with Anchor Bay at that time. And they just picked up the Studio Canal library. And one of the titles they got was The Wicker Man. And he said, if you're making documentaries, you should make one on The Wicker Man for the extras on the Anchor Bay edition, because there's a great story behind the making of it. So that was kind of the beginning of me doing stuff with Bill, and I came over to the US to edit that, and he was really happy with what I got. So as more and more films were being licensed by Anchor Bay, because that DVD era was just business was booming. Everybody finally wanted a collection of films as opposed to just renting films. And of course, DVDs were so much more manageable in size than VHS tapes, and they also looked so much better. And they had the extras and special packaging in some cases. So that was something where people really started to want to own stuff over here in the US. And they started licensing so many movies that Bill just would give me lists of films that they picked up or were going to pick up, and said, all right, what can we do as a featurette? And it was great, because I just got to kind of dive in. And on one trip to Europe, I started in Amsterdam and interviewed Sylvia Crystal for the Emmanuel films. Then I went to Berlin on the same trip and interviewed Istvan Szabo for Mephisto, and also Buddy Giovinazzo for the Joe Spinell story. And then we went down to Paris and interviewed Jussier Kahn, the director of the Emmanuel films. And then, you know, I'd go to Italy all the time because there were so many Italian films, which, you know, it's hard to imagine now that we've had so many editions of all these Fulci and Argento movies now, but they just hadn't been available in a decent version in the US at the time. You know, they were often retitles, recut, badly framed, all that kind of thing. So the fact that they were coming out on DVD in their correct aspect ratio and uncensored was a big deal.
My mind is still blown by how Anchor Bay was able to get into the Disney library and pick up Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Black Hole. Now they're impossible to get a hold of.
This was all Jay Douglas, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But he went knocking on the studio's doors and saying, "Hey, we'll take your crap that you're not doing anything with on home video," because they hadn't really cottoned on to this market for film collectors at the time. So I think the big one was Army of Darkness, where basically they did a version of Army of Darkness, and when they sent the first royalty reports to Universal, they were like, "This movie is doing these kinds of numbers," you know, and they check for however many, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it was. So all of a sudden they cottoned on to this idea of kind of the special edition and remastering these movies and putting them out. But Jay went in there, and to them, Army of Darkness was just this dud that had done nothing, you know. And of course, you know, that was this completely separate market of film fanatics, which is now what we cater to at the boutique labels. It's obviously a lot smaller now than it was in the DVD days, because they were selling 50,000 copies, 100,000 copies, 200,000 copies of The Evil Dead, you know, that kind of thing. But those days are long gone. But it's still the people who actually, you know, were born just started actually collecting physical media and the idea of their own library of films at home, you know.
I was working at Suncoast Motion Picture Company, and every time Evil Dead came out, there was a limited edition 10 that we had to put a sticker on and wrap it and put it behind the counter. We didn't want people walking off with it. There was the original ending, the theatrical ending, those things, and the Evil Dead. You could just keep releasing them, and they would just fly off the shelves. It was.
And Anchor Bay did re-release the Evil Dead films several times. I mean, they actually got a lot of flack for that, for constantly going back to the well with the Evil Dead films. But that's kind of what allowed them to then, for Jay to like go and get a lot more ambitious with going to studios and paying money to get movies, you know, stuff that, because the parent company Anchor Bay, they didn't know what these movies were at all. But as long as they were bringing in money, as long as there were a few hits in there, then they could just really kind of just go for it and be experimental on the kind of films they go after. And, you know, they did special editions of like Repo Man and Two Lane Blacktop and stuff like that had not really been given that kind of attention before. And Heathers was another one, which again was not a big movie and until like the DVD era. Now it's, you know, it's considered like it was a John Hughes movie, but it wasn't. It was like it was a tiny movie when it first came out.
So now you've dipped your toes in a little bit of everything. Now how does Severin Films come about?
So after Anchor Bay, Bill basically split off from Anchor Bay and formed Blue Underground, his label Blue Underground. It's called Blue Underground because we were working together on the featurettes, and he formed a company called Blue Underground in order to be the featurette production company. And we were working together, and he said we should just keep the name because it's a cool name. And I was definitely for that because, you know, that's only going to benefit me. So that's it. So he formed Blue Underground there, and I was with Bill at Blue Underground for the first, I think, 5 years that it was operating as a label. And that's where I started to do a lot more than just kind of the bonus features production. That's when I started to actually do production of the discs and starting to license movies and that kind of stuff. And so the playing field got very busy at that point from a lot of people who'd worked for Jay and Bill, or with Jay and Bill in some cases, and there were a lot of labels cropping up doing genre films, and the market was going down. And so basically Bill was starting to get tired of having to, bid against other people. He had so many employees at the time that he just wanted to kind of, put the brakes on a bit on the amount of material that he was putting out. And so at that point, me and my old pal Carl from England and John Cregan, who was working as an editor with us at Blue Underground, we decided to look into some rights of our own. And we actually initially were mainly looking into kind of soft erotic films, because of all the boutique labels, most of them had done some soft erotic stuff like Emmanuel in America or The Image or Score, things like that, but none of them were concentrating on that. And the weird thing was that subgenre was actually one of the most reliable. They didn't necessarily perform huge out of the gate, but they were always consistent sellers. But the boutique labels wanted to concentrate on the genre stuff that they actually liked more than the stuff that was necessarily sort of just a commercial proposition. And I did too, to be honest. I mean, horror movies is much more my thing. But the fact that we started in the kind of with Black Manuels and Gwendolyn and Felicity and Jess Franco films and things like that actually put us in good stead when we first started in an overcrowded playing field. And so which is lucky, because basically it's very hard to keep a business running when you've only got a library of 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 titles. It's only when you get up over 50, 100 or whatever that you actually have a reliable kind of royalty stream. So anyway, that's kind of how that started. And then, so soon enough, a lot of those other labels just started to fall by the wayside. And then we actually moved into genre stuff, fairly quickly after that. Although we're still doing the erotic stuff. I mean, we did the Black Emmanuel set, which I think is the, is the ultimate tribute to that subgenre. So that's kind of how that happened.
What was the first title that Severin Films released?
Gwendolyn, and it was Gwendolyn, and it did really well, and it was actually one that I'd pitched to Bill several times, and he watched it and was like, "This movie's terrible, I don't want to do this." And the second was Felicity, which is an Australian Emmanuel ripoff by John Lamond starring Gloria Annan. And that was one that John had seen, on Skinamax when he was a teenager, and it made an incredible impression. And nobody else seemed to really care about this Australian Emmanuel ripoff in the boutique labels business. But when it was released, it was a huge hit, and so was Gwendolyn. So obviously, people had the same nostalgia that John had for when they saw it when they were younger.
So you've specialized at Severin with kind of like Euro horror, video nasties. Do you feel like growing up with that video nasty era, this is kind of like you're righting a lot of wrongs? That has to be an empowering feeling. Like, look,
yeah, I don't know about empowering, but there's a certain amount of revenge when I go and license any video nasty that's not available anymore, and or buy it outright, because now it's not even righting wrongs. We're actually going completely in the other direction, where we've made something like Night of the Demon into something that is very much worth celebrating in a special edition, which probably would have kind of just fallen by the wayside as another kind of gory Bigfoot movie from the early 80s, but its video nasty status actually gives it that kind of extra forbidden factor, which makes it something special. So basically, yes, we do a lot of that, but I think more kind of philosophically speaking, basically that was something I became obsessed with when I was young. When those films started being banned, I just became obsessed with how wrong that was. Like, how even at that young age, I knew how wrong the authorities were, and that they were lying, and that the politicians are liars, church people, they're liars, moral guardians, they're liars. Because I was seeing it coming out of their mouths, and I was like, what they're saying is simply not true. And so it became kind of a a form of, I don't know, teenage rebellion in order to just, I'm not only am I going to prove them wrong, I'm going to make sure I own all of these, and I'm going to spread the word of all these things. And little did I know that would actually be ultimately my life career path, you know.
At Anchor Bay, on some of the releases, I feel like it was the blueprint for slipcovers. You would have like an insert in the DVD case that was alternate artwork. Sometimes I would actually pull that out and put it in the front of the cover. Did you ever think slipcovers would be what they are now, which is kind of insane?
Well, I still don't. I understand the idea of beautiful packaging. I mean, basically, that comes with the territory of wanting to make the best physical media item. So, in that respect, it does make sense, you know. But the idea that it's in some cases kind of it's like, well, if it doesn't have a slipcase, I'm not buying it. That's a bit weird still. But in terms of the fact that those inserts at Anchor Bay, they were actually used for chapter menus on one side, and then they would use like a poster, an original poster from some territory on the other side, because they would put new art on the front cover in a lot of cases, but then they would put like the old one sheet on the insert, you know. A lot of these films that we put out, the remaster, have great artwork from around the world, and it's a shame to just use one, piece of art. So the fact that you can actually put one piece of art on the slipcase, one on the wrap, and sometimes on the B wrap as well, you know, it just makes sense that you're using the best artwork from around the world.
That is concerning as a fan of physical media, that somebody might not buy a movie based off if it has a slip or not. I love the packaging as well. I get it. It's kind of like vinyl. You want the whole thing, but at the end of the day, it's what's inside that counts, and it's the movie. And I hope that's not what people are doing. But I do kind of hear talk of, what, slipcover wasn't good. I'm like,
yeah,
you need to relax a little bit.
We don't do slipcovers on all of our releases. I mean, we do on a lot of them now, but not on all of them. I mean, and it's a question of sort of time. Basically, there's so much that goes into the production of the discs that sometimes the packaging actually comes around last, because, you know, when you're producing documentaries or featurettes or restoring the films, you know, all that kind of thing takes a long time, costs a lot of money. And then when it's reaching the finish line, it's like, oh, okay, we can put it on the schedule now. Let's squeeze it in there amongst all the other stuff. I send like the list of stuff out to my team of what we've got coming in the coming months, and then Amy, who is in charge of packaging, you know, she's ultimately the one who sort of makes the decisions about which ones have the slips and which don't. And sometimes it's like, is it a bigger film, is it a more of a special edition, that sort of thing. But she simply does not have the bandwidth to do that on every single title that we release.
Now, with slipcovers, is there ever a risk where if you're releasing something like Cruel Jaws, and then you have a slipcover that says Jaws 5, I hear a lot of fanboys talking about stuff that maybe they don't know anything about. Can you kind of put to rest, like, they're worried that like you're going to get taken to court or something?
Yeah, no. So that all comes. So basically, what we did a couple where we actually did a limited slipcover, only available on the website, with the title "We Can't Advertise," right? And so, but these films were released under those titles in other territories, right? So Cruel Jaws was Jaws 5, I think, in Spain and maybe Japan. I would have to check the accuracy of that, but it was definitely released as Jaws 5 in a couple of places because Italy was particularly bad for this, where they would just put a 2 after, you know, some successful film had come out, and then they'd basically make a local sequel and they can just call it such as Alien 2, you know, and basically release it as that until they got stopped. But by the time they got stopped, the film had already made its money, and that was that. So basically we did that on Cruel Jaws, but we didn't really sort of think that it would last or go any further than that weekend to the sort of people in the know in the Severin crowd. But yeah, Universal did get wind of it and they were not amused. But you know, we didn't have a court battle or anything like that. They were just like, okay, we're not proceeding with the talks that we'd been doing on some other titles. They were not impressed with our with our renegade ways.
Are Universal the ones that are keeping The Last Shark from being released? Vic Morrow?
Yeah. That's so that one because it had an actual injunction, a court injunction back in the late 70s, just before Jaws 2 came out, or maybe after Jaws 2 came out was when the injunction actually was filed. But the story is that it came out as Great White, I think it was Great White was the US title. It might have been The Last Shark, but the problem was that it had a scene with a helicopter and the shark biting down the helicopter, which was already in the trailer for Jaws 2 and was part of Jaws 2 and was going to be one of the big set pieces of Jaws 2. And so that was enough to make it look like copyright infringement. This is a story that I haven't heard from anyone at Universal. I haven't read any court documents, but I heard that from Enzo Castellari, and that's kind of the legend. But certainly when we tried to screen The Last Shark, when we had Enzo Castellari over here, it was very quickly that a cease and desist was received at the movie theater that this film is still under injunction. So that's why it won't be seeing a release anytime soon. It would have to be Universal approved, and Universal is not going to approve the release of that film.
So I won't ask a loaded question about the Russ Meyer's films, but Severin was able to get in there and put out some of these movies. Can you just talk about what's come out so far and possibly what's coming in the future?
Well, it was interesting because we've been trying to get these films for a long time, and I assume that other labels had as well. And the trust just weren't ready yet to partner with somebody. You know, the people at the trust, they're a little gun shy over who they do this with, because they want it to be done in the way that Russ would have done it. And so we had to kind of make a case for why we're the right company for that. And initially they were like, well, you're a horror movie company. But of course, then we could go back to what our origins were. And we did a whole big, long thing about, we've got everything from, internationally renowned erotic films to Oscar winners films to, all this kind of thing. So we were able to really make a case for it. It took a while to basically, convince them that we were going to do it the way that Russ would have wanted. But eventually we got there, and essentially we've been getting along with them actually pretty well, because we do see eye to eye on how this should be done. So initially we just licensed the 5 films that we've already either released or announced, which is Vixen, Super Vixens, Beneath the Valley, The Ultra Vixens, Up, and Motorpsycho. And so those are the ones that we actually did a deal on. And so at this point we're just in talks about whether we're going to do another batch.
Can you say, is it based off of sales, or is it, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds where things that you can't speak about.
I think it's based off, the fact that we've been sort of true to what we said we were going to do. I think that's the sort of main thing, and we've consulted with them at every step of the way, on every piece of marketing, on every trailer that we cut freshly, all the extras that we've done get run by them. So everything we've consulted with them. So we haven't just kind of taken the movies and gone. And primarily we've remastered the movies to the standards that that they are now remastered. I mean, that was well overdue, and they knew that. And so basically they didn't want to, they weren't necessarily experts in film restoration, right? So they basically wanted to make sure that this was not being half-assed. And so we didn't. we went as far as we could on that. In the case of Beneath the Valley, the Ultra Vixens, we went very far to restore it, because that one was actually quite damaged. The negative was.
And it must be just a relief, not just one of the founders, but as a fan, to finally announce these. I'm sure you've been wanting to talk about these for the longest time, and I could tell that there was like a big sigh of relief on the Severin part, that, oh my God, because the reaction was the buzz I was expecting.
That was the thing as well, because there were sort of discussions like, has he fallen out of the zeitgeist for too long now that people don't actually know? Certain people obviously know who Russ Meyer is, and people, and Severin fans certainly do. But he was really kind of a household name when he was at his peak, you know, post Vixen and all that. But you know, he'd been out of the public eye for quite some time now. But no, the good thing was that the other thing that we wanted to do was not only position him as the kind of you know, the man who made movies about buxom women, as like the proper American, the true American independent filmmaker that he was, you know, like more so than John Cassavetes in terms of the way that he actually was truly independent and did everything right down to the distribution, right down to, you know, picking up the phone to actually take orders for videotapes and that sort of thing. So he was, you know, a real American icon and a great filmmaker with an incredible eye, you know, a superb cameraman, you know, and so much is so uniquely Russ. Like you know a Russ Meyer movie when you look at it, you know. So that's really kind of falls into the auteur theory, not to get too, you know, lofty in film school about it, but we very much wanted to, like we do with a lot of the Severin titles, we're taking these things seriously. You know, this is just because they were made for a lower budget for a more blue collar audience, shall we say, doesn't mean that they don't deserve the same treatment that Criterion will give to, you know, something that's considered a cinema classic. You know, it's just, you know, we know that these things are favorites of ours. Like that's often how films get selected at Severin, is one of us is like, we've got to get this movie, you know, and so we want to treat it right.
How rewarding has it been working on these films and becoming friends with people? Were you close with Jess Franco?
I mean, I wouldn't say we were like, you know, family or anything, but we certainly got close because of the amount of time that I spent there in Spain. But also we brought him over here to Austin, Texas, to the Fantastic Fest, in cahoots with Fantastic Fest. So I was with them for that. And that was the last time I actually saw Jess and Lena together. Lena died first, very surprisingly, and very sadly. But yes, I mean, I got to know them well because Jess still, even though he was physically not very agile towards the end, he was still kind of that bon vivant. So after we would do the interviews, we would always, you know, go for dinner or listen to music or whatever. So I got to actually spend time with them. And I really liked them, and I really came to appreciate kind of that lifestyle that they you know, ended up incorporating. They made it their life. Their cinema was their life. You know, they would travel to places with some friends, shoot a movie, you know, and just fantastic. So now of course that I've been, since he passed away, and I've been with Stephen Thrower to a lot of the locations for the kind of travelogue featurette series we've been doing in the land of Franco. It's even more clear, like some of these places were just fantastic. You know, I'm amazed they got anything shot, honestly, because it was so they're so idyllic, some of these places. But that was it. Jess was kind of an addict to shooting stuff. He wasn't necessarily addicted to finishing his films and making them ready for public consumption, but he was addicted to shooting all the time, and that was part of one of his real passions in life, along with music and food and the other stuff that all came with the territory.
What is one film that's not been put on home video that what's your most wanted? If you could put out one, I always think people want the most uncut version of Ken Russell's The Devils.
The Devils is one, and I honestly don't really know what the holdup is at this point, because there can't be anybody left alive at Warner Brothers who had like a personal vendetta against the Devils, even if that was true, because that was always the rumor that there was someone who's like, I'll never release this uncut. But if that person must be dead, and there's no way he left in his will, this can never come out in the future, you know? So I honestly don't know why that is. I know that certain studios, and I'm not necessarily saying this about Warner Brothers because I've never dealt with them directly, but certain studios just don't want to like get involved in any kind of potential like legal situation where so they might just be like, well, let's just we've got to stay with the authorized version. But I know more and more studio companies that license from studios have actually been allowed to release, director's cuts that were never the official release version, things like that. So never say never. But yeah, I mean, that would be a good one. It wouldn't be for us though, because we don't play well with studios.
Well, the ironic thing is they have no problem putting out The Exorcist, which made them a ton of money, and the new Space Jam movie with LeBron James. There's a scene where it's like the greatest hits of Warner Brother characters, and there's a nun and the devils in the background, and it's a new film. And I'm like, you want to forget about?
There's no way that there's somebody at Warner Brothers stopping this from happening. It's just, it's just got to be something that are like, well, that was never actually part of the film, so therefore, you can't just put something into the official version of the film. Nobody's going to go and check the paperwork that was made back in 1971 or whatever it was to make sure that, whether it was Ken Russell who had the final say or the studio or whatever, but there's got to be some reason why they're just like, it's too much, like a headache. Let's just release the other version.
Let's talk about, we're at Valentine's Day, and you have some new movies come out today. Can you tell everybody about what was released?
Yeah, so this month is all Kayla Janice produced materials, and if anybody who's seen the All the Haunts Be Ours volumes, or House of Psychotic Women Volume 1, or the Black Emmanuel set, knows that she doesn't do things by half. She once she gets a project, she's going to make sure it is the ultimate edition of and she does it in a way that, I mean, we try to do that with pretty much everything that we release, but she does it in a way where she just gets focused, stuck in. She comes up with people to comment on these things that wouldn't have even crossed my mind. So she's got a second volume of House of Psychotic Women, which includes Michael Winterbottom's The Butterfly Kiss with Amanda Plummer, Jorej Hertz's Morgiana. What else is in there? The Savage Eye, which is like a late 50s. It's almost like a Mondo travelogue, but of Los Angeles, with a woman touring around Los Angeles. Fantastic film. And what is the fourth one? The Glass Ceiling. Oh yes, Eloy de la Iglesia's The Glass Ceiling, and Eloy's become a real kind of Severin Hall of Famer, because ever since we did Cannibal Man, all of a sudden, we started looking into, well, Kayla specifically started looking into his work and got the Kinky films, and we got a giallo out by him. We've got more stuff coming from him, and the Glass Ceiling one is one that's been out of print for quite some time, and it's a terrific movie. So that's the box set, which she also produced a board game for, by the way, which is kind of like Clue, but not. Then Entertaining Mr. Sloan, which is based on the Joe Orton play. And then In My Skin is the big one, which we're doing in UHD, which is this fantastic movie, debut film by Marina Devan, French filmmaker. And I hadn't seen it when she brought it to us, and I watched it and was just, it's a fantastic film. And I got to interview Marina for the extras, and it was hundreds of interviews I've done, and this one is one of the most memorable that I've ever done. If you see it, you'll understand why. But that's just one of many, many extras that she's put in that. So all of that dropped as our Valentine's Day announcements today.
I also want to tell people about your podcast. Where can people listen to that?
Well, everything of ours is either on our website or on our social media. So, but if but basically the Severin Films podcast was something that Andrew, who's our post-production supervisor and kind of the savior of the company, because he has the most. We all have a lot of plates in the air at the time. He has the most, and but he is. He was the one who persuaded me to start a podcast, because I didn't want to do it. But once I started doing it and getting into talking about these films, and sometimes we get the filmmakers on there or whoever produced the disc or whatever it is, we just chat for an hour or two or three if it's a box set, and then it's followed by Alfonso Carrillo of Rendezvous doing kind of a musical selection, either from the movies announced that month or inspired by the movies announced that month. So it's become a regular monthly thing.
As far as the future for Severin Films, are we going to get more Lamberto Bava, Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci? I'm sure you can't give away titles, but what's the future hold?
Well, I guarantee that both of those directors are represented in the not too distant future. So, but I can tell you, just looking at my whiteboards, my famous whiteboards over here, we've got so many titles that we have to get to the finish line. And before the licenses run out. I mean, some of them are 2-3 years old, and we've got to get them out before the license finishes. So it's just a matter of getting them done and out.
I was trying to look at I couldn't see the whiteboard.
Yeah, no, it's out of frame, I'm afraid.
Well, thank you, David Gregory. I appreciate your time. I love what you guys do at Severin Films. It's nice to see a fan who made it as far as you have. I mean, you're kind of living the dream. It's something a lot of people out there would love to be involved with, but everybody
it sometimes doesn't feel like that. It can be quite stressful. There's a lot of rights conflicts and things like that on these kinds of movies. There's a lot of elements issues. We've been working on a huge Spanish box set, and some of the films in Spain, because it was during the Franco era, they had to have a clothed version, and we can't find the nude scenes that were released overseas, all that kind of stuff. There are so many headaches on a daily basis, but you're right. It is like, I'd definitely rather be doing this than anything else.
Well, hopefully the tariffs that are going on in this country don't affect home video in general with prices and stuff. Let's hope for the best in that area.
Let's hope so.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Stay scared and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.